Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest. Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not a peaceful protest.
Get off my lawn. That was President Joe Biden breaking his silence in regard to the ongoing pro-Palestinian protests that have been taking place on college campuses across the nation. Now, unfortunately, there have been two different ways in handling the protests by school administrations, the bad way and the good way. The negative way has been to call the police and essentially crack the skulls of the protesters who have built encampments, tent encampments on those campuses, minding their business, but obviously making their demands for the university to divest from Israeli companies known. In the other example, you have schools like Brown University that actually decided to interact and engage with the students, and they came up with a solution, and the students peacefully dismantled their tent encampment and they went on with their day. Now, what you heard there from President Joe Biden was fascinating framing, because he would have you believe that these protests have been violent and dangerous. There have been some instances of some vandalism, but to say that these protests are violent in nature is insane. In fact, the only instance that you can see very clear and dangerous violence was on the campus of UCLA. And the reason why things got violent is because pro-Israeli counter-protesters showed up and started throwing firecrackers and things like that at the protesters.
Beating people with sticks.
Correct, and we'll show you evidence of that in just a moment.
So I got a lot of thoughts on the UCLA thing, because my God, did they arrest the wrong people. And the propaganda myth-making factory of mainstream media is unbelievable. There's a perfect details in this story. Just quick note on Biden though. He said breaking windows. Well, no, actually a window. Okay, that's the only window that was broken, was one little pane in the Columbia Hamilton Hall. I'm not saying that, hey, it was definitely right to go into Hamilton Hall. That's a good and interesting debate, right? But let's be clear about the situation here. He says, oh, they're forcing the colleges to cancel graduation ceremonies. Are they? Did they demand that any graduations be canceled? No. It's the universities that are canceling the graduations, the universities that are asking the cops to arrest everyone. Almost everything that he put on the peace protesters is what his side actually did.
So let's give you some updates on what the latest updates have been on these college campuses. So last night, for instance, authorities gave protesters in the UCLA encampment an ultimatum: either you leave or you face arrest. Hundreds of individuals did choose to stay. By morning, about 200 of them had been arrested, and here is some footage showing you what the scene looked like.
What you are hearing there are flashbangs or stun grenades that the police are deploying, and you're hearing some of the students who are in that encampment yelling as police in a mass move are trying to what is called kettling, trying to get around this protest to try to make this smaller and smaller and smaller, so they are pushed into an area where they can then bring them out, detain them using the zip ties that we've been seeing them use throughout the morning.
Yeah, fascinating. So who had the zip ties? Who had the grenades, flash grenades? Who had the rubber bullets? It was the cops, and from what I saw, the cops were the ones who were being super aggressive and violent with the students, who in every video that I've seen prior to the cops being called did not engage in violence. They tried to defend themselves on multiple occasions when counter-protesters showed up and tried to beat them, tried to take down the encampment's walls in order to get to them. But I mean, yeah, it's funny how little the lives, like it didn't matter what the protesters did. That's what this all says to me. The protesters can be as non-violent as humanly possible. They can be engaging in this protest for the most righteous reason, which is to stop the bombing in Gaza, which has already killed far more civilians than Hamas militants. And that's something that the IDF has acknowledged and conceded to. Yeah. But it doesn't matter, Cenk. You can't be perfect enough if you are protesting what Israel is carrying out in Gaza, the government, the school administration, the corporate media, they're all gonna come down hard on you and smear you as if you're the one engaging in violence. It's insane.
Pausing here to deliver some honest truth as we do in our news coverage as well. TYT is facing challenges, guys, as the entire industry is. You know who could make the difference? You. If you hit the join button below, it's gonna make all the difference and keep us in business. We appreciate you, thank you.
Okay guys, part of what we do here is break the gaslighting so you don't feel alone and crazy when everyone is lying to you. So look at this perfect example here at UCLA. So the one biggest case of violence in any of these protests, as Anna pointed out, was when the pro-Israel extremists, because they don't represent everybody who's pro-Israel, right? And pro-Israel is a wrong word anyway, but okay, we simplify that way. Those guys, the extremists, attacked the UCLA students. They beat them with sticks, they yell at an old lady, they do all these horrible, horrible things. None of them are arrested. And then they say, we demand that the victims be arrested. And the cops say, well, of course. And they arrest the victims and none of the perpetrators. And then the cops say, when people ask, hey, why did you do that? They say, well, because we wanted to prevent violence. That's why we arrested the victims of the violence.
I have to show you another example of the violence because we mentioned the firecrackers being thrown at the encampment by the counter protesters. Here's the example that I'm referring to. So again, that was the campus of UCLA. You have the counter protesters throwing fireworks into the encampment of the pro-Palestinian protesters.
Maybe they thought it was Israel and they could just bomb people with impunity. And it turns out they could. Okay, so for those of you that are only listening to this show, the firecrackers are significant and they land inside the encampment and then blow up. Okay, but to me that pales in comparison to F you, old lady, yeah. as they were manhandling an older woman in the encampment, and then just bum rushing the protesters, hitting them, and then of course there's the videos where they clobber them with sticks over their heads. But can we be honest about why there was no arrests when obviously the counter protesters were massively violent? Because if you arrested pro-Israel protesters, you'd be in a lot of trouble.
So I was watching local news last night because they were streaming everything that was happening on the UCLA campus. And first of all, let me just say, the local media's commentary, particularly KCAL 5, was so egregious and disgusting. They were so thirsty for violence. But for violence to be carried out against the pro-Palestinian protesters. The reporter on the scene, I'm sorry, I forgot his name. One of the most disgusting on the ground reporters I've heard in a long time. He went on to suggest that, the protesters look well supplied. These protesters are probably, who's funding them? Who's behind this? Almost as if these are like paid actors and they don't genuinely feel any type of commitment to the cause that they're protesting about. The other thing that he was talking about was, these protesters have these wood sheets, like sheets of wood, right? I forget what it's called. Even though I work with wood. Anyway, but they're doing that to protect themselves from the counter protesters. He doesn't mention that they're doing that to protect themselves from the counter protesters at all. He just mentions how they have built this fence. For what?
Inviting people to attack it. You see how it's the victim's fault? So Fox News outdid them. Their so-called analyst came on and said, the counter protesters taking a brave stand by attacking the protesters.
Oh, that's what I was gonna say.
That's a brave stand to assault people?
This is what the reporter said in regard to the police not stepping in to protect those in the encampment. He said, well, you know, these are probably the same protesters who wanted to defund the police. So now they're asking for police to protect them. He literally said that.
Yeah, no, don't worry, the cops came though to arrest the victims. All right, so last couple of things here on this UCLA part. Number one, so how do we know what really happened? It's not just the videos that we're seeing online, it's all the print reporters on the scene, including the LA Times. Thank you for being there, thank you for doing great journalism. They clearly say there is absolutely no question at all that it was the pro-Israel extremists that attacked first and throughout, okay? And they were stunned that cops just would not, and security, would not step in to protect the protesters. So what happened is crystal clear. Now, if you watch cable news, did you get the sense that the most violent attack was against peace protesters, not by peace protesters? So when I say you'll be in a lot of trouble, what do I mean by that? There's nothing like nefarious, like, oh, there's a group that makes decisions and hands about. No. So like, but there is some level of groupthink, certainly in the media. So that's why you see us pointing out consistently what reality is. Because if you watch cable news, they will take these same videos, Fox News literally did it, and blame the victims. And they'll say, can you see how these protesters were sitting around waiting to get assaulted, and God bless the counter protesters for assaulting them. I mean, they said it was a brave stand to do it, right? So we're breaking the gaslighting in that sense. And then, but if they, because of that, if they actually arrested the counter protesters, the media would have rained down hell on UCLA, the president of UCLA, the dean of UCLA, et cetera. Congress might have called them in for investigations. And then you've got the alumni, like in Columbia's case, Robert Kraft, who, you know, multi-millionaire, I don't know if he's a billionaire yet, owner of the New England Patriots, saying I'm gonna cut off all your funding. I mean, there is a significant price, it's not coordinated, but there is a significant price to pay if you don't support the Israel side.
Listen, I totally get why you have to keep giving the caveat about how it's not coordinated. And to be clear, there is no indication that there's something coordinated going on. But does it even matter? Does it matter if it's coordinated or not? I mean, you have wall-to-wall negative coverage toward these protesters, regardless of how peaceful they are, regardless of how much others try to provoke them into violence, and they, do not take the bait. The media is against them, our politicians are against them. I mean, you have Congress, the House of Representatives, in a story we're gonna cover later, passing an unconstitutional bill to essentially censor protesters from criticizing a foreign government, Israel.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk about that later in the show. We're also gonna talk about Dana Bash's CNN segment that was so egregious later in the show. But part of that segment I wanted to point out here, because she showed a video of a Jewish student being blocked from somewhere, being able to go to class.
Allegedly.
No, they do block. But she left out the most critical thing of all, which is, and I know this from UCLA students and people on the ground, they were blocking, and reporters, they were blocking everyone. Like it was a matter, they weren't like, oh, Jewish student, block him. But hey, you Christian or Muslim, go through. No, they were blocking everyone, and you could be mad at them for blocking everyone. But the media makes it look like they're terrible anti-Semites who are only blocking the Jewish students. And then Jewish Americans justifiably are freaked out by that. They're like, what the hell is this? If that's what I thought reality was, I'd be livid about it too. In fact, that was the first video we ever showed you on this at Columbia when they were blocking a student because they called him Zionist and they were doing the human chain. I said, that's terrible, right? But that's not what happened at UCLA. But if you do the right thing, the media will smear you. There's no question about it.
Jake, and that's why this story has been, all right, like full disclosure, this story has been difficult to cover because there's so much misinformation and half-truths floating around all over the place. And so, look, the video that Dana Bash showed, you don't see a full context. So I don't know if he was trying to walk into the encampment and the students felt threatened by it, right? You don't know the full context of that video. But aside from that, you see these instances of violence occurring, right? And if you don't know the full context of what happened at UCLA, you might be fooled into thinking that the violence was carried out against the pro-Israel protesters.
Yeah, I mean, because it's a looking glass. It's just, it goes through the lens of mainstream media before it arrives to you. And in that lens, they distort it so that it's totally unrecognizable from the truth.
It's not just mainstream media, Cenk, it's also online, okay? People who have political agendas online, who have biases online, they'll share videos and they'll do so in a dishonest way, or they'll narrate the video in a dishonest way, which is why it's been difficult to cover. And to be honest with you, the same thing happened during the summer of 2020 with the BLM protests. And you should never take anything you see online at face value. See if there's fuller context into it. And if there isn't, just wait for the story to develop more. But one thing that's been clear to me, and I've noticed this as a trend when it comes to the news coverage overall of the pro-Palestinian protesters, they've been considered the bad guys since day one. So regardless of what their conduct was, the coverage was going to be negative. And I want to give you a few other examples of other campuses and how those campuses responded to the protesters. Police did clear the Portland State University library this morning, which was occupied by protesters. Yesterday, the NYPD also arrested 15 students at Fordham University. And late last night, 90 protesters were arrested at Dartmouth University. But some students are actually making some impressive gains. So I want to end on that, right? Because the universities that have actually decided to engage with the students in good faith, and also another thing that stood out, the students who had very specific demands actually saw some success. So Brown and Northwestern are considering divesting from companies tied to Israel. Now, Brown specifically was willing to engage with the students because they asked for 11 companies specifically for the university to divest from. And so they are now considering doing that. And then today we heard news that there's yet another university that is considering the demands, at least some of the demands from the protesters. So the encampments that were put up by protesters at the University of Minnesota today are being dismantled, and that's because the university has agreed to hear them out. So here are the concessions that the school is willing to make, and it's not limited to this, but here's what they are willing to do so far. Giving students the opportunity to address the Board of Regents on the matter of divesting from weapons manufacturers and companies linked to the Israeli military. So it's not just simply Israeli companies, it's military related companies that they have an issue with. Also, the school has agreed to disclosing additional information about the university's holdings in public companies, which I think makes a lot of sense. I mean, the endowment is funded, at least partially, by tuition. The students should know where that money is invested in.
Yep, and I have the last couple points here. First, from the members, because they made some great points here. Pseudo Dragon wrote in, they were fireworks, not firecrackers. It's a big and much more explosive difference. Thank you for pointing out that difference. I appreciate it. Look at the members doing the show with us. Hit the join button below, become one of those members. Just Jim wrote in, I was at Ohio State during the Vietnam War protests. Everything was fine and peaceful until outside non-student forces arrived, just saying. So yes, this happens to almost every peace protest, every civil rights protest. Some people come in, and it's mainly the cops who do the attacking and cause the violence and then blame it on the peace protesters. It's not to say that everybody in every peace protest in history has been an angel, etc. But it's so easy to pick out a couple of needles from that haystack and to try to make it seem like, oh, it's all of them. The peaceful ones are the violent ones, because George Orwell was right about everything. And then finally, look, in terms of the outsiders, I saw all mainstream media emphasizing this, and I thought that's curious. I wonder where they're going to go with this talking point, because I can understand students saying, hey, listen, we didn't do anything wrong. Maybe a couple of agitators from the outside came in and said some terrible things or whatever. But why is mainstream media talking about outside agitators, right? Well, part one was they understood, oh, the student attacking the students doesn't look great, so let's pretend it's agitators and they're the real problems. Okay, but that was nothing compared to the main course. So I got on Chris Cuomo's show on News Nation last night, and he says, what if it's another country that's funding these protests and sending in these outside forces, maybe a Middle Eastern country? What if it's the Muslim Brotherhood that's doing it? Like what kind of insane conjecture is this? And I told him I've never disagreed with you more. And then I was like, oh, that's what they're gonna go with. And then this morning, Morning Joe says, look, I gotta say it could be Qatar. What do you mean you gotta say it? Do you have evidence of that? They're just making it up. that Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood were somehow causing the violence from the peace protest. It's like, look, if Alex Jones said it, you would say it's a lunatic conspiracy theory.
No, but Cenk, I mean, to be fair, it would be absolutely devastating for our country if a foreign country had that kind of power over our people, over maybe our power centers. You know what I'm saying?
Outrage. Well, and of course that's part of the projection here, because since they're so overly, enormously influenced by Israel, let's just spit it out. Let's say, of course, AIPAC spending all that money. At least in the case of the politicians, gee, I wonder if $100 million makes a difference to politicians, right? But everybody in Washington will say that's an outrageous and offensive thing to say. Okay, so bottom line is they're like dirty Arabs. They did all the violence and no evidence at all. This is just a giant smear machine against like 99% of the peace protesters. That again, I talked to somebody in Colombia. They're wondering the peace protesters are so careful not to offend 99% of the time for 99% of them. And then when the arrest first happened, they were shell shocked in Colombia, because there was nothing going on. There was a couple of videos outside of campus, and all of a sudden they're like, this perfectly peaceful protest, 100 people arrested. Last thing, finally, we got to find out about the outside agitators that from Qatar that came into the Colombia protest. The New York Police Department released the number of people. What was the percentage and the raw number that were outsiders in those protests in Colombia? 1.
Really?
Yes, 1 of the people arrested
I had
was
not
a
seen
non-student.
that. I was wondering about that because there was a lot going on about the individuals who occupied Hamilton Hall and renamed it Hins Hall. You know, some people were claiming that they were outside agitators. I believe Mayor Eric Adams was one of them.
Oh yeah, Eric Adams is lying about almost everything. So and New York Post just brazenly, with no information at all, saying probably about half of the agitators were outsiders, etc. And they're all making it seem like that there was a takeover by nefarious, dark Muslim forces, taking these poor students and making them violent and attacking the Jewish students. And again, if you're Jewish, I get it. If you thought that's real,
if that's what you're hearing from the media,
I'd be furious.
Yeah, absolutely. If that is what you're hearing 24/7 from the media, I could totally understand why you'd be terrified. But it sucks because they're instilling fear in people that don't need to feel that level of fear, and at the same time, they're smearing peaceful protesters and not doing their jobs as journalists.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.